Right. Welcome, everybody. I don't know if I can follow that great OSINT presentation. Sorry, I will try not to move around too much. So, welcome. I'm a last-minute emergency replacement for a hurricane emergency speaker. So, Phil Planamera comes up to me. He's just like, tomorrow, he's like, I hate to do this to you, but I need you. And I'm like, I've been waiting my whole life for you to say this, Phil. But it turned out he really only wanted me to speak today. So I'm here, and I'm happy to be here. So let me start off by asking you a question. Is anybody in here familiar with the Pyramid of Pain? A couple people. The rest of you who are not, why the heck are you in here?
They might think it's the old talk.
Yeah, the old talk, yes. Yeah, I don't know who the old talk was, but sorry, you're not getting that one. So that's okay, though. We'll talk about that. But before we get into that, a little bit about who I am. My name is David Bianco. Right now, I'm a security researcher at Splunk's Surge research team. But I have let's just leave it at over 20 years of experience in incident detection, incident response, a little bit of cyber threat intelligence, mostly about how it relates to using it for incident detection, incident response, and threat hunting. I like to say I was cybersecurity before there was cybersecurity because, we didn't even have the name cybersecurity when I started. I started as a system administrator, actually, when I was in school at university, and just kind of grew into cybersecurity from there. So even before my 20 plus years of experience in cyber, there was let's say an unnamed number of years as a system administrator of Unix and Linux systems. Fun fact, I spoke at the very first B-Sides Augusta, which I think was it 2013, I think? It was a lot different. First of all, a lot smaller than this. We didn't have like 4 tracks of talks. We only had 2 tracks. And we certainly did not have these fancy badges, which I love, by the way. These are my favorite circuit board badge, actually. We didn't have these fancy badges. What we actually had was when you came in, we had a red team track and a blue team track. When you came in, Doug Birch would punch you in the face, and which eye was blacked would be your red team or blue team track ticket. No, I'm just joking, because Doug would never, he's such a nice guy, he would never punch anyone in the face. It was Phil. And I'm also, let's say, a noted pyramid aficionado, which gets us to my only actual slide for this entire talk, the Pyramid of Pain. The idea that I want to talk to you about is how I came up with this. But first, for a little over half of the people in the room, probably I should talk about what it is. Very, very briefly. If you want the full write-up, there's the URL here. I promise it's a bit.ly link, but it's a totally safe bit.ly link. It just goes to my blog. I'll tell you shortly how I came up with this, but basically think of the pyramid as a model that you can use for some of the different types of indicators or CTI data that you might be receiving to help you detect things on your networks for defense. And it kind of gives you what I consider anyway, the relative value of those different types of common indicator data. So I value things based not on how easy they are for me to use, but how much work or how much pain it causes to our threat actors. Like they have, in all of their attacks, they have some type of indicators that they can't really help but leave around. Like if you really want to get into this, Google Lacard's exchange principle, but the whole idea is if a threat actor is doing something on your network, they are leaving some kind of trace and they can't avoid it. Our job then is to find those traces, notice when those traces are present in our network, and quickly do something about them. so that we can interrupt their use of those, like maybe in the midst of their attack cycle before they complete their kill chain. If we're able to do that, reliably especially, but that means then if we can find that indicator, they can't use it anymore. They have to find something to replace what we detected. And that's where the pain in the pyramid of pain comes in, because it means that not all of these are as very difficult to replace. Like on the very bottom down here, you'll see the hash values. I marked them as trivial because, 1 bit in a giant file, you get an entirely different hash value. And that's not including the fuzzy hashes, by the way. I really could have called this static hash values like SHA-1, MD5, those kinds of things, not things like SSDeep or others. But you make a very small change, and they have an entirely different hash value. Sometimes, these things are so easy to change a hash, sometimes it even changes just by accident, like a transmission error flips a bit, and it's still a fine binary, and it still works. Sometimes you will see like a threat actor just changes the compile date because they just make a fresh compile before they deploy. That changes the hash value entirely. So hash values, by the way, are kind of garbage for detection, with certain specific exceptions to that rule. They're low on the bottom. They're on the bottom of the pyramid because threat actors don't care if you notice their hash value. They'll just come up with a different one. Domain names and IP addresses, the next 2 layers, are a little bit more. It's not so difficult for a threat actor to control a bunch of, like, let's just say, I need 10,000 IP addresses. I'm going to keep all of them in my back pocket. And when you find my one IP address I'm using for tool downloads or command and control, I'll change it. No problem. Domain names are pretty much the same, although you generally have to go through the trouble of either registering it or co-opting it somehow from a legitimate domain owner, but still pretty easy, especially for some of our threat actors who might be closely associated with their domain registrars for their country. Next level up, we're starting to talk about tool marks, or as I call them here, the network or the host artifacts that get left behind. How do you establish your persistence? Is there a registry key or a certain file on the disk? Is there a certain way that you construct your command and control channels, a user agent that you use, a URL pattern that you construct? Even if it's randomized, there might be a regular expression that you go by that can detect it. At that point, you can find those, and in order to fix it, so that you don't find that anymore, they might have to go in and make some changes to their code. They might be really small changes, like renaming the registry key or changing the way they build their URL, but they have to do it, and then they have to recompile it, probably retest it, and redeploy it. So it becomes a little bit annoying there if you force them to do that over and over. Eventually, you get some experience with the tool. That same tool you might see over and over again, and you can maybe develop more robust detection, like where's Paul Nelson? He was talking about Yara rules earlier today. You can maybe make some more robust detection so that no matter what small changes they make to the tool, you can still reliably find it. That way, you've just told them they can't use that tool against you at all, and they have to go out and either create a new tool from scratch or maybe acquire a new tool and either way train up with it, become proficient. And that's pretty challenging. They could do it once, maybe. Above that, though, we call it the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. If I had more space, and had I thought of it at the time, because TTP was a cool phrase back then, I probably would have called it just behaviors, because that's really what it is. It's just the way that they're trained and the way that their preferences mix up together to express their activities on your network or on your systems. So you find their behavior. No matter what tools they use, no matter what artifacts they leave behind, you're looking for them at a very high level. And I will give you some examples of these shortly, but when you come to the part where you're attacking someone's training and you're saying, you can't do things the way that you were used to doing them with, you have to retrain, find a new method. That's extremely tough for them, especially if you can do that to them multiple times. I like to say you're putting them on the pointy top of the pyramid, and it's a very uncomfortable place. And you force them to either retrain and change their behavior, which if you've tried to lose weight, quit smoking, whatever, you probably have an idea that that can be hard. Or they go away because they're not willing to change. So the pyramid of pain, the whole idea is for you to prioritize your human effort on things that give you the most potential benefit and make your systems most resistant to a particular threat actor. So I keep wanting to change the slide now, but I don't actually have any other slides, so I'm just going to put that thing down. I originally published the pyramid in 2013, the end of 2013. Several employers ago, but I kind of came up with this idea over several years prior to that. I just didn't know it as a pyramid or as a model. At first, it was just like an instinct. So I started at a giant company. I won't name them. We just followed the OSINT presentation, so it probably won't be very difficult for you guys to figure out who it was, but they had just started a new security team for all of their businesses worldwide, and we had a lot of them. And one of the things that we started off with was a baked-in set of threat actors that were already targeting the company. We just hadn't had as much visibility and response to combat them as we developed over the next several years. But what we did have was we had really good information sharing with other peers in our industry. So we started off with our, the baby steps of our intrusion detection, our network security monitoring, our incident response, by taking a look at what the other peers were seeing in their network. They were doing threat intel sharing before we had ISACs and things like that, but this was basically almost the same thing as an ISAC. We would take basically IP addresses, domains, and hash values from them against the threat actors that we thought were likely to come against us. And there was a particular one that we were concerned about that we kept dealing with over and over again. We started essentially, even though it didn't exist yet, at the bottom of the pyramid. And every time we learned something new, we put it back into our detection so that we could find it again. This particular threat actor had an implant that they used that they would leave behind to perform command and control on just, whatever systems they had compromised. And it was really interesting. It was the core of the implant never really changed, but it was a network command and control, so they had a bolt-on, like a DLL, that they would change, that would change the way it established its command and control over the internet. And it would use a two-way command and control, so typically it would set up to send data back, and it would set up to receive commands, and if it connected successfully to receive a command, it would set up another channel to send data back. So they had two channels for two-way communication. The initial versions of this were HTTP-based, plain text HTTP. And we would see these, and we were mostly by then, at first, detecting them on hashes or domains or maybe IP addresses that we knew were were bad from our threat intelligence. But we collected a few samples from ourselves and from our peers, and I started noticing that there was, random, these were HTTP based, so the URLs had kind of random looking pieces in them, but there was a predictable structure, and I could create a regular expression that would find them. And given enough samples, which we had, I could tell you, like, for example, this part of the URL ranged between 5 to 8 characters long, and it was always composed entirely of, say, uppercase letters. So it made a regular expression. All of a sudden, we started to be able to find their implant when it beaconed out. And we had, at the beginning, maybe not quite 24-hour live coverage, but we definitely had pager coverage. And so we had the ability to, like, as soon as it beaconed out, jump on, find out what was up, interdict, cut them off. And so they didn't like that, and they were like, fine, we'll just change the way we build our URLs, suckers. And okay, we temporarily were blinded a little bit, but we still had a little bit of that domain and hash and IP address knowledge, not to mention the knowledge from our peers. So we were able to quickly adapt and find out, oh, they just changed the way, like the format string for the way that they built their URLs. We can make a new regular expression. And again, started interdicting them in the middle. The next thing, they were like, okay, all right, you can see the way we make our C2s, very clever guys. What if I encrypt it? So started seeing SSL. Yeah, that was a little bit of a challenge at first, except that we got a little bit lucky because these were not native English speakers. I don't know if that was a factor or not, but when they created their own SSL certificates, they had a weird capitalization, like a one letter that should not have been capitalized, that was capitalized. And I was like, I can find that. So we did, and we started to be able to interdict them there. Now notice, we started off with the intel at the bottom 3 layers, domains, IP addresses, and hashes down here. I'm pointing to it like all the people at YouTube can see it. Domains, IP addresses, and hashes. But as soon as we started collecting samples and doing the regular expressions and the examining the certificates, we moved up into this network and host artifacts layer. After that, guess what? They were like, okay, HTTP, you guys are really good at it. Props to you. What if we changed to FTP? Because remember, it's just a bolt-on, whatever. Surprise to them was by the time they were fighting us at the network artifacts layer, we were fighting them at the tools layer. Because we had enough experience with this tool that we noticed no matter how they created the connections, the data flowing over the connections was actually from the back end of the tool. And we had identified a heartbeat that we could reliably find. So as soon as they put out their new FTP version, we were like, we found it. Here it is. Jump in, interdict. I say we were at the tools level. That was a little bit of a lie. We were actually at the behavioral level, the TTPs. Because we had the detection there, but guess what we also had? We also had a lot of experience doing incident response with them while we were busy down here and they were kind of in the short term winning. So we knew all about what they liked to do when they were in the network. So we were able to create rules and detections that would find their behavior. So one of their key behaviors was they would take all of the data that they were going to steal from around your network, put it into one place, and like a data staging area on your network. Use the RAR archive utility, break it up into exactly 640 megabyte chunks. I never figured out why, except if they were going to write it to CD-ROMs or something, maybe. Could have been. I mean, that was a thing, right? And encrypt it. And then they would transfer it usually over SMB, but not always. So we had a detection looking for encrypted RAR files going from across the internals of our network, because we never used them for legitimate business purposes. So while they were still fighting us on the artifacts layer, we had brought the battle to the tools and the TTPs. And there came to be one night, I don't exactly know what time, but it was well after midnight, let's say 2 or 3 a.m., because that was probably it, where we got alerts from both the FTP and the behavioral things, and we jumped on while they were still copying that data from the staging point to the place that they were going to exfil it from. So it was still in our network. They hadn't escaped with it yet. And we were able to jump on in the middle of the night, cut off their transfer. The pieces that they had begun to exfiltrate, cut those off. And all this time, with all this experience we had with their network C2, we actually even had a decoder. So we could take the PCAP we were capturing from our NSM sensors and run it through the decoder and see what all they were doing, including when they were on the systems typing things. So we cut off their command and control node, and they fell back to their backup command and control node and started pinging it. It's down. Oh no, okay. But nothing else was down, just their one control node. So they were thinking, they're watching us. So the next thing I saw was maybe the funniest thing I've ever seen in my professional life, is they started typing all these commands to see who was logged on to the machine, the NT machine that they were on, the Windows box. Like, that's how I discovered that the Q user command existed, by the way. They were looking for, are we being monitored at the host level, but they didn't really think of it at the network level. And a minute or two later, they logged off. They never came back. This was a well-funded, state-sponsored threat actor that we chased off our network, essentially, even though we hadn't created it yet, by putting them on top of the pyramid. We chased them up, a perfect example of how we chased them up the pyramid over time. And they never came back. And we knew they never came back because we knew what they did when they wanted to maintain access, and we kept seeing that they tried to get that access back, but they were never successful, at least for the next few years until I left the company. The pyramid, I hadn't written it down at the time, but a couple of years later, we had recently created our own CTI team to replace my janky CSV file of everything we learned. We created a CTI team, and we had like a global meeting of the security teams coming up to headquarters, because each of our business units had their own security teams, or many of them did anyway. So we had a big stakeholders security team meeting where we intended to cover a lot of topics. But one of the topics we wanted to cover was our brand new threat intelligence database. Because we had just recently come up against a big major milestone. We had 1 million indicators in our database. Wait, sorry, hold on. 1 million indicators. Which seemed so great. And they were like, so that means you have deployed these all to detection, right? And I was like, hold up, wait, stop. Raise your hand if you know why I was telling them to stop. Yeah, Mike does. The Security Onion folks all know this. It doesn't matter. You have 1 million indicators. Which ones are good for detection? Which ones are not? Big clue is, I already said, all those hashes. Not great for detection usually. Good for threat intelligence and crawling up threat actors on stalking them on VirusTotal and whatever. Not so great for detection. But I couldn't really figure out how to tell them this. And we actually spent, my mind was like in my memory, I think it was like the entire afternoon, but it can't quite have been that much. I couldn't get it across why we didn't just like deploy everything to detection. So I was sitting in the hotel lobby bar with some of my teammates that night, and we were going over the meeting, how we felt about it, and I was like, yeah, something, I just can't figure out how to express this. So I had my laptop in my bag next to me, and so I just pulled it out. And I'm drinking a beer in the lobby, and I was just like, I need to show them something. So I started playing out. I'm terrible at graphics at all. So my only real option was Microsoft Smart Art. And so I started playing around with some ideas, and I was like, oh yeah, a pyramid, a hierarchy. Yeah, I have a hierarchy in mind, so I'll just put them in the... And that is the secret origin of probably the world's most famous piece of Microsoft Smart Art. is I had developed this over a set of few years by actually interacting with threat actors and seeing that this worked. And then at one day, I just got frustrated not being able to say how I was doing what we were doing and why. And so I created the pyramid, and I brought it into the meeting the next day. And that was it. That was immediately, they were like, OK, I got it, thanks. It's kind of anticlimactic end to that story, but they were like, thanks. OK, next item on the... So I have some stuff here to give out in my last couple of minutes. Some nice prizes from the conference sponsors. I have an intrusion detection honeypots book. Chris Sanders wrote this. I've read it. It's actually a really great book, so I recommend it. Also, I have from Southord, I think, right, is this lockpick and beginning lockpick how-to book. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and the first person who can tell me the answer can choose which one they want, and then the second person who can answer my next question is going to get stuck with the leavings. First question is, this is actually Pyramid of Pain version 2. Who can tell me the difference between the original Pyramid of Pain and Pyramid of Pain version 2? Good answer, not correct. He says, oh, you must have had behaviors before TTPs. Did you?
The colors were different.
The colors were different. I mean, technically, yes, but that's not the answer.
At some point, have IPs and hashes switched around?
Did I have IPs and hashes switched around? No, but good guess. It's close to that. Less items in the pyramid, but what was I missing? It's not the TTPs.
Network artifacts.
It was not the network artifacts. Come on, 3 more at least, right? Yes, it was the hash values.
There you go.
Which one would you prefer?
I'll take the book.
All right. Yeah, the first version of the pyramid did not have hash values in it.
And the colors were different.
And the colors were different because there wasn't a blue. So, all right, the next one, I don't really know what to say. So I'm going to say, this is probably going to really be a disaster. Who has the best use story of the Pyramid of Pain? Who wants to come up and tell me how they've used the Pyramid of Pain and in a real life? Nobody. Oh, yes. That was great. So for everybody who didn't hear it, he said he was trying to convince his team to get beyond the atomic indicators, my words, but I think that's and into the behaviors. And he used the pyramid in part of his presentation to show them why you should do that. And that's exactly the reason that I eventually published it, because we found it so helpful, I wanted to share. And speaking of sharing, I'm kind of out of time now, but I'm here for the rest of the afternoon. If you are interested in the pyramid, you want to talk more about war stories, or if you just would like some cool stickers or buttons or whatever, hit me up outside and I'll be happy to hook you up. Thank you very much.
Does he get selected? Does he get
Oh, yeah.